Once upon a time, in a valley where the mist rolled like soft cloth over the hills, there was a small town that seemed to have been stitched from kindly hands. The houses were low and white, the roofs red like the cheeks of someone who has just laughed. A river ran through the town, slow and steady, carrying leaves and secrets. And in that town there lived a young person named Elias. Elias was known for two things, a quick smile and a slow hand. He was not cruel, far from it. He liked to sit in the square and watch the sun spill gold over the market, and he would laugh at a child's joke until his whole chest laughed with it. He loved the smell of bread and the way rain felt on the skin. He loved comfort, and he loved the soft ease of doing very little. People in the town called Elias lazy. Not to his face at first, people were gentle, but in corners, when a roof needed mending or a field needed sowing, his name was a whisper. There goes Elias, who will sit and watch the wind. He would hear the whisper sometimes, and he would smile and think, I will be happy nonetheless. That was his small creed. But happiness and living are not the same thing. The seasons will not be content with smiles alone. One summer the rains were late, the baker's oven cooled. The farmer's little boy grew thin. Tasks that used to be shared were asked of each person in turn, like coins passed around a table. The town needed steady hands. The town needed people who would rise while the stars were still turning, who would go out and mend what was torn. Elias continued to sit under the old plane tree, his back against its rough bark, watching other people hurry. He told himself stories sweet, soft stories about how one day the house would be full of bread and laughter, and how his hands would not need to hurry. He told himself that the world would do its part. Then, one evening, the town bell rang in a way it had not rung before. The bell was a deep, honest sound that traveled like a thought. It called for people to gather in the square. A traveling teacher had come. Her name was Mara. She moved like someone who had known both long roads and long winters, and she had eyes that seemed to understand the smallest things. Mara stood in the square and spoke. She did not shout. She did not shame anyone. She told a story. There was once a river, she said, which liked to sleep. It would curl around a stone and pretend to be a lake. Fish would ask where the current had gone. The river would smile and say, I am fine. I am restful, but a dam rose one season and the river found itself stuck. The place that had known motion creaked and wept. Only when the river understood that rest had its time and that motion had its work did it find a way to move again. And the valley lived. People nodded. The baker made a small noise in his throat like a kind cough. Someone clapped once, softly. Elias listened, and when Mara's eyes fell on him, they settled like a warm hand. Come, she said, and she did not call him lazy. She called him curious. Come, child, walk with me tomorrow at dawn. Elias woke before the sky had painted itself. He had been woken before by fishing nets and rooster cries, but this was different. He felt small and like a great bell inside him had been rung. He walked to the river where Mara waited. She offered him bread, warm and simple, and looked at him with a patient brightness. Why are you here? Elias asked. To learn, she said simply, and to teach. There is a careful courage in small acts. There is a quiet bravery when one chooses to do the next thing. So, I must what? Work. Elias laughed a bit. I can watch, can't I? Watching is nice. Watching keeps the heart calm. Mara smiled. Watching is a good beginning. But if you want your heart to be calm in a different way, if you want to be strong when storms come, you must practice small things until they become your bones. She taught him the way elders teach small children how to hold a spoon. Not a lecture, but a holding of hands each morning they met. At first, the tasks were tiny, sweeping the path by the bread shop, fetching a pail of water from the well, carrying wood no heavier than your own chest. Elias did each thing awkwardly. He dropped the broom once and sat down. He laughed at himself. He thought that was the end. But Mara would sit near him and say, again. She would say, again, slowly, gently. She would say, one more time. Her voice was not hurry, it was a metronome. On the third morning, as Elias pumped the water, his fingers began to find rhythm. The bucket rose like a small sun, and he felt something like pride prick at his ribs. He had not expected pride in such a small action. He felt foolish for being moved, and then he felt grateful that he had felt it. You see, Mara told him when the work was done, and the town yawned awake. Confidence is a seed. It does not grow because someone tells it to, it grows because you water it each day. Elias tried to carry the idea home like the lantern. It glowed. He practiced more. The bakery's oven needed would cut in measured pieces. The cobbler wanted a pair of shoes carried to a woman across the stream. Each task was a page in a new book he was writing without knowing it. But of course, there were days when he wanted to sleep. He would sometimes lie in the warm morning and reason that such softness was a right. He would think, I will begin tomorrow. He told the same lies he had always told. And each time he delayed, he noticed that the small seed Mara spoke of shrank a little. Not gone, only smaller. One day a storm came. Not the polite summer respectability of rain, but a wild thing with whine like an angry drum. The river rose and sang with force. A cart on the road tipped and a sack split, spilling grain like the town's small wealth into the water. People shouted and rushed. Hands were needed, and quick. Elias felt his chest tighten. He thought of the plane tree and the square and his soft seat. He thought of how people had once whispered about him and how he had smiled and let it be. He thought of Mara's saying, do the next thing. He rose, not because of courage or because he felt ready, but because the town needed him. He waded into the swirling water. He grabbed a rope. He tied what he could. He pulled with people whose hands had calluses like map lines. He carried sacks from the mud to higher ground. He worked until his nails were raw and his shirt clung to his back. He did not think of laziness then. He only thought of the person who would need bread in the morning. He only thought of the small boy whose eyes had been bright yesterday and who might go to bed hungry tonight. When the storm finally softened, the town sat in a hush, breathing like someone after running. No one praised Elias with loud words, but they looked at him differently. Someone, an old woman who had once been a seamstress, put a hand to his shoulder and said, "You did well." It was a thin sentence, but it warmed him like bread. The next morning, Mara found him sitting by the river again, and she did not smile with triumph. She simply said, "You have learned something." "What?" he asked. "That the world asks for work. And you, when you answer, you become part of the answer." Elias wanted to hold that sentence like a talisman. He tried. He practiced carrying it inside his chest like a stone that made walking steadier. He started to do more without thinking it big, waking before the sun not as punishment but as a choice. Helping a neighbor fix a fence because the neighbor's hands were shaking. Offering to teach the little ones to skip stones because the little ones needed someone who would be patient. Confidence is strange. It does not always roar. It often whispers, "Try again." It is found in the repetition of small acts, in the way your hands remember the curve of a task. For Elias, confidence was built from the tiny bricks of doing what needed doing, each one placed with honest awkwardness. There were setbacks. Once he took on a job that was too big for him. The miller asked him to help push a stuck wheel up a slope. Elias strained until his breath was thin. The wheel did not budge. He worked until his shoulders trembled and his spirits sagged. People passed and did not stop. Elias felt small and foolish. For a day, he wanted to crawl back into his old comfortable shell. He thought perhaps he had only been pretending to learn. But Mar came by with a small loaf of bread and with the same gentle insistence. "You tried," she said. "You will learn. Come, let us find another way." They walked to the mill together. Mara did not shove or scold. She suggested a different place to push, a different angle, and some neighbors came, not because of Elias alone, but because everyone is a net and a safety for each other. With a few more hands, the wheel turned. Elias felt his knees shake with relief and a sweet humility. You see, Mara said confidence is not the absence of failure. It is the knowledge that you can stand up and try again, often with help. Slowly, Elias began to change. His smile remained, but now it was paired with a kind of steadiness. People began to notice that when something was needed, he was one of those who would come. They told stories, small ones, about his deeds. The mother who cried because her goat had gotten stuck was helped by Elias and later told her children, "See how our Elias is. He has hands that do good work," and each time someone said his name with a new tone, no longer a whisper of reproach, but of gratitude, Elias felt a new thing settle in him. It was not only pride, it was the sense that he belonged to the world in a useful way. That belonging fed him, different from bread, but nourishing nonetheless. One afternoon, when the light was honey and slow, a traveler came to the town. He carried a satchel and wore a hat shadowing his face. He watched the square for a long time, then he asked for Elias. He had heard, as travelers do, a small song of a man who had learned to move his hands. "You helped me once," the traveler said when they met, eyes like river stones. "When my cart was stuck on the road last week, you and your friends came, you pushed, you held the rope." Elias remembered that day, how he had woken with a tired heart and how he and others had laughed while struggling. The traveler smiled now and offered Elias a job in a place far beyond the town, in a workshop where things were made for people in cities and for people who needed careful hands. Elias listened, his heart beat like something warmed by fire. A part of him was afraid old fears, the comfortable habit of sitting. A part of him was thrilled. He thought of the mornings with Mara, of the storm, of the wheel, of the small boy's eyes. He thought of Mara's words, "Do the next thing." He thought of how confidence had grown from being watered. He accepted. The town bid him farewell. It was not a loud parade, but people came with small offerings, a spool of thread, a jar of preserves, a hat that had been mended. The old seamstress pressed a coin into his palm and said, "Remember to return sometimes." Elias left with his satchel and a heart that felt, finally, like a steady drum. He traveled roads that were new and wide. He learned tools that had names like whispered spales. He made things with his hands until his fingers knew the shape of the world a little better. Years passed. He wrote letters home when he could, and sometimes he returned to the town when seasons allowed. Each time he came back, he found Mara sitting where she used to sit, and she would nod as if glad at the simple proof that patience can change a person. One evening, many years on, he found Mara looking at the sunset. She looked older, but her eyes were the same steady light. Elias sat and did not speak for a while. He had been through much success and failure, cities and workshops, lonely nights and bustling mornings. He had learned the value of repeated practice. He had learned that confidence is a quiet companion, not a loud boast. "Mara," he said finally, "do you remember the river story you told the first week?" "I do," she said. "Do you remember the lesson I tried to show?" "Yes," he said. "Do the next thing, water the seed." Mara smiled, and in her smile there was all the soft proof that time offers. "You have done well," she said. "You have learned that comfort is sweet, but courage is sweeter in its steadiness." Elias looked out at the valley. He thought of the boy who used to be lazy, who had found small acts and turned them into life. He thought of the way his hands once trembled and now knew the weight of work. He thought of how his confidence had never declared itself in thunder. It had arrived in mornings, in the way he rose, in the way he helped, in the quiet that came after a job well done. He turned to Mara and said, "Will you tell my story to the ones who sit and watch? Will you tell them that a person can change?" Mara's laugh was soft. "Yes," she said. "But not to shame them, tell them the truth gently. Tell them that a life can start with one small task. Tell them that confidence is a practice. Tell them to be kind to themselves in the process. Tell them to do the next thing. Listen, you who read this, you who have known the ease of watching more than the pull to act, this is not a sermon. It is a lantern for the slow path. Start with the smallest thing you can do. Make your bed, pour water into a cup for someone. Sweep the path, send a note, speak one honest sentence. Then do the next thing. Do it again tomorrow. Do it again slowly, again, gently, again, with the patience one uses for seedlings. A seed that is watered will not sprout overnight. It will take time, but each drop helps. Each drop is practice. Confidence will come to you not because someone tells you it will, but because your hands learn to trust themselves. And when storms arrive, and storms will not find yourself frozen. You will find your feet steady, your hands steady. You will act, you will be part of the answer. People will look at you and say, you did well, and you will know that well is a habit you have formed, a pathway you have walked 1,000 tiny steps to build. So remember, comfort is sweet, and it has its place. But if you wish for a life that carries weight, if you wish to hold the warm bread of accomplishment in your hands, begin with one small thing. Keep at it, be kind to yourself, love your slow learning. Praise the small victories. Repeat again and again, do the next thing. Always, always do the next thing, and in that doing, you will find that lazy no longer names you. You will find a new name, confident, steady, present. You will find that your world will begin to trust your hands, and that trust will bring back trust in yourself. This is the lesson, not a miracle, but a practice. Not a sudden change, but a series of small, true acts. Not a grand shout, but a whisper that becomes a steady voice. Not force, but kindness that shows up every morning and carries a pail and lifts a wheel and holds a child's hand. May you learn, as Elias did, the power of small things. May you, too, choose each morning to do the next thing. And when you falter, remember Mura's gentle words, again, slowly, gently, that is how confidence is grown. That is how a life is made.